Welcome everyone to today's meeting of the SDP Sustainable Development Panel. Got two substantive items in due course for 2020-21 annual monitoring report and the Article 4 direction, but start from the top with apologies.
Chair, we've had apologies from Councillors Stonnard, who is the chair of the committee, and just for the record, it was my error that Councillor Hampton is the vice chair, and we'll come to that when we go on to minutes of the previous meeting. We've also had apologies from Councillor Osborne, and Councillor Schmierer is the substitute for Councillor Osborne. Thank you.
Thank you. And then any declarations of interest? It looks like a no. So yes, on to the minutes.
Right, under the minutes, I do apologise to members, but sorry, I was a bit erroneous. In the appointment of the vice chair, the vice chair was appointed at the meeting on the 14th of June was Councillor Hampton and not Councillor Giles, as set out in the minutes. So I do apologise for that error, but it is correct. So I've corrected the minutes. And if you can agree the minutes subject to that amendment, please. So that would be to amend the list present and item 2. Thank you.
And other than that, are people content with the minutes? Yep, so.
Do you want me to move?
My apologies for that.
No, I mean, do you want me to move?
I think consensus or a show of hands will win. Thank you.
I think that's a consensus then. So on to the first main item, and because I didn't realise I was chairing this till quite last minute because of the little confusion there, apologies, I'm not entirely sure who's presenting what, so I'm just going to hand over somewhere over there for the 2020-21 annual monitoring report.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, the 2020-2021 annual monitoring report. This AMR, as I'll refer to it from now on, is being published later than usual. As you can see, it's the 2021 report. Our staff resource has been focused on the preparation and involvement in the Greater Norwich Local Plan process. The AMR covers the period 1st of April 2020 to the 31st of March 2021, and the information is within this report is accurate as of that period, but we have provided any updated contextual information where that's relevant. And it's hoped that we can present the next annual monitoring report, so the 21-22 report, more promptly as well. And just to note that this report that we're talking about today, it does cover several periods of national lockdowns and other measures associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. So we have referred to that where that's relevant. Just sort of some background information. This is covering policies in the Joint Core Strategy and in the Development Management Policies Plan. And the Greater Norwich Local Plan is currently undergoing examination in publics, and once that's adopted, the GNLP will replace the policies in the Joint Core Strategy. So to start with, I'm just going to give an overview of the monitoring against the Joint Core Strategy policies. The total CO2 emissions per capita and per sector have largely decreased across the board. The percentage of household waste recycled and composted has increased in South Norfolk and Broadland, but decreased in Norwich. It's possible that there's a reduction in the production of waste that can be recycled and composted in Norwich, could be responsible for those reduced percentages, but that is not specifically monitored at the moment. I'll come back to housing in just one moment. There's been a further loss of office floor space in Norwich city centre, although this is significantly less than the loss sustained in the previous monitoring periods. The overall net reduction in office floor space in Norwich city equates to a 30% loss in office stock from 2008-9 to 2020-21. There'll be more sort of detail and context around office floor space in the following item relating to the Article 4 direction, which Judith will present afterwards. So in relation to housing, for overall housing delivery in Greater Norwich, there's been a decrease from 2,075 units in the previous period to 1,468 units in the 2021 period. Within Norwich itself, the delivery of housing was down from 495 dwellings to 166 dwellings, but this does not include completions from C2 communal accommodation or purpose-built student accommodation. If you include both of those types of accommodation, then in Norwich the delivery for that period was 300 dwellings, and the C2 and PBSA accommodation accounted for 45% of the dwellings delivered in that period. Affordable housing completions also decreased excuse me, across Greater Norwich from 658 in the previous period to 314 in the 2021 period. And in Norwich, that reduction was from 184 to 20 dwellings. So the decreased housing delivery is in part due to the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, resulting in the closure of construction sites, in addition to the impacts of construction costs and labour shortages, and this is a trend that's been reflected around the country and isn't unique to Norwich. So following on from the housing figures, looking at housing land supply. So in previous AMRs, we've reported to you about the change in the way that we calculate 5-year land supply. In previous years, we've been able to calculate this on the basis of the Norwich policy area. So we've done similar calculations, which are in Appendix 3 for this period as well, so that there can be a comparison with previous years. That calculation concludes that there has been significant under-delivery of housing within the Norwich policy area and over-delivery in the rural policy area over the whole plan period. This results in a housing land supply position for the Norwich policy area of 4.74 years. However, it's no longer possible to calculate the land supply using that methodology anymore, and instead we use the standard methodology. So by comparison, the housing land supply is calculated as 6.01 years across Greater Norwich and 4.37 years across the city. So the supply is reduced slightly across Greater Norwich compared to the previous monitoring period, but there's been a marginal increase in housing land supply in Norwich. It should be noted that this 2020-21 land supply is not affected by nutrient neutrality issues. This is the position prior to Natural England making their announcement that developments need to be nutrient neutral before consent can be granted. And the 5-year land supply will be kept up to date as part of the GNLP examination process as well. So we've got as much up-to-date information presented to the inspectors as possible. So to summarise the housing land supply, for the purposes of determining future planning applications based on this AMR information, 5-year land supply has been demonstrated in Greater Norwich. However, there is still under-delivery of housing against the target set out in policy JCS4, and officers consider that the need for housing to meet local need is at least as great as it was previously, and great weight should still be given to this issue. So I'm going to move on to an overview of our Norwich-specific development management policies. Back in 2019, we did undertake a review of the DM policies and the site application plan, just to review whether they were up to date and responding to changing local needs and circumstances. That review concluded, in general, that the policies are fit for purpose, but recommended that a review of the DM policy should commence. However, since then, there's been numerous future potential policy changes presented by the government, such as those introduced by the Environment Act and those proposed in the Levelling Up Bill, which could have a direct impact upon local planning policy. So it's considered prudent at this time to wait for more certainty on national planning reforms and the adoption process of the Greater Norwich Local Plan before this review commences. So just to look at some of the key things that have come out from the 2021 monitoring for this. There's been a reduction at both the Lakenfields and the Castle Meadow monitoring stations for air quality indicators compared with previous monitoring periods. 335 new homes were granted consent compared with 746 in the previous period. The total housing commitment, which is the number of dwellings with outstanding planning permission and remain unbuilt, and those allocated for development in the plan, was 6,245. I won't go into housing delivery again because we've covered that already. There were no new consents granted in the period for student or C2 accommodation. As I mentioned before, there was a continued loss of office floor space in this period. Interestingly, we also saw an increase in the number of committed prior approval consents for office to residential conversions, and these applications were responsible for the largest overall losses of office floor space in this period. The city centre retail sector appeared to be performing well, with none of the primary or secondary retail centres falling below their required thresholds, despite the monitoring period covering several periods of national lockdown. However, there has been a net loss of retail floor space across the city within that period. In terms of district and local centres, the picture is a bit more balanced. There's several centres with a reduced proportion of retail floor space, but other centres have increased their proportion of retail floor space. Early indications of 2022 retail monitoring is that it's a positive picture again, and this will be reported in more detail at a future SD panel meeting. We have the largest amount of community facilities floor space approved since the adoption of the local plan, and the largest amount of education and training floor space was also approved since the adoption of the plan. This period saw the highest number of applications refused for non-provision or insufficient provision of car parking, servicing or cycle parking since the adoption of the plan. And the refusal of those applications on those grounds amounted to 24 dwellings that would otherwise have been granted consent. So the recommendation is just to note the contents of this report. The AMR is published on the GNDP website already, and happy to take any questions.
Brilliant, thank you, and thank you for such a good summary of a report with us. Quite a lot to unpack here, really. So, I'll open it up for questions, comments, as ever, if we can keep it to one topic and one question per point, both to get round more points and to give a better opportunity to actually address your question. I saw Judith first, then Denise.
Thank you, Charlotte, for the report. And you say it's to note. There's an enormous amount of work that's gone into this just to note. and I just wondered, if it hadn't been delayed, when would we have seen this normally in a normal sort of pattern of
I think we would normally expect to see, because it runs up until the 1st of April every year, so we would normally expect to see it autumn time that same year. So if we
last autumn.
and it's been delayed obviously because of the resource issues with the Greater Norwich local plan.
So now that it has been delayed, do you think it will go on to be delayed?
Our plan is for it not to be delayed. We are working on gathering the information for the 2021-2022, so the latest monitoring period. We're working on gathering that information now, so it's not going to be presented autumn now, but it will be earlier, hopefully, and it is just dependent on resources.
But it is a difficult time, and as you say, there's new information coming out from the government as well, and that needs to be taken into account. I just wondered if there's a couple of interesting things in here, and what's going to happen to them? I mean, this idea that air pollution has gone down. We think it's because there weren't so many people using public transport. The idea that we're recycling less, we think it's because perhaps we haven't got as much rubbish. Who's going to take these issues up and actually delve into them, or are we just noting it and moving on?
So at the moment we are noting it, but it's information that's very useful for the Greater Norwich local plan when that becomes adopted, that will also have to be monitored. We'll have a set of monitoring indicators for that as well, and it's really useful for us to know what information we think we might be missing from our current indicators, so we can amend those new indicators coming forward so that maybe they could be a bit more informative for us going forward.
And that would apply to the waste one.
For example, we could, yeah.
Because there's no point in having that statistic, and I know we've talked about it before, because it doesn't tell us anything really about the picture. It's just a snapshot, and we need to delve down a bit. And on the issue of the amount of land that we have for development, you say it's 4.37 years. Are you telling us that, and then therefore officers consider that the need for housing to meet local need is at least as great as it was previously, and great weight should continue to be given to this issue on relevant applications? Are you saying that developers could still challenge us on this 5-year issue if all other things were correct in the application? We should allow things to go through.
So developers could challenge the 5-year land supply position even if it was above the 5 years. They are still able to put forward a case why they disagree that they may think it is a different 5-year land supply. So that is our calculation based on the information that we had available at that time, and obviously it will just be tested at different times during appeal decisions as and when they come forward, and we'll use the utmost up-to-date information we have at that time when we're testing that.
Okay, that's fine, thank you.
Councillor Carley?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, yes, thank you very much, Charlotte, for a huge amount of information. And I agree with Judith. It's a pity just to note the information, but and hopefully, as you say, it's taken on board. So my comment is about questions about affordable housing and how the council can ensure higher levels of affordable housing on brownfield sites, for example, Angley Square, or on housing land generally, when developers are challenging viability. I've got a concern about the councils, the Greater Norwich Development Partnership, seeking higher levels of affordable housing by setting high and, in my view, unrealistic housing targets, which include a numbers buffer, because this is having a knock-on effect on the environment. For example, more housing in the open countryside is leading to longer car journeys and more carbon emissions, and also we're seeing greater pollution of rivers by phosphates. So how do we achieve the affordable housing without having very high housing numbers with environmental impacts? Thank you. I think probably the council might disagree with my premise that actually that the housing targets are set too high. But the present GNLP, I think it's got a 22% housing buffer, as I recall. Or it might be even higher.
I'm not sure off the top of my head what the housing buffer is for the GNLP.
Yeah, but I think the Joint Core Strategy also has a high housing buffer as well. And as we're seeing, that it's very difficult to achieve we set very high 5-year housing supply targets, but it's very difficult to achieve them. And so then developers come along and challenge plans on the basis that the housing isn't being delivered on allocated sites, and then they get permission on greenfield sites.
I'm not sure exactly what the question is, if you could just to sort of then, so I can try and respond to that.
Sorry, but I say, how can we get higher levels of affordable housing on brownfield sites where the developers are challenging viability?
Yeah, I mean, we've got an SPD for affordable housing that enables them to provide information on clear information about the assessment. So But yes, it depends, I suppose, it depends where you are in the economic cycle, where the challenges to viability are, and we're looking ahead over quite a long time period to 2038, so hopefully things will change over time and we'll be able to achieve more viably through viable development. But yeah, I take your point, and it is the figure is very low this in this monitoring year, but that is historically very low, isn't it? Because it's been a lot higher previously.
Yeah,
for
the previous year it was 184 affordable completions, so and that is much lower than normal. But I think that's also a symptom of generally housing delivery was low in that period, so it makes sense that affordable housing delivery was also low in that period.
Yeah. So with those affordable homes, were they councils, that they were social homes as opposed to?
I would have to double check that. That's somewhere in here, I believe. Bear with me and see if I can find it. I might have to go back and check that for you and come back to you on that, just because I think it's on one of the spreadsheets that I can't currently access, I'm afraid. So I'll write that down and I'll come back to you on
Thanks
that.
very much, Charlotte. Yeah.
Okay, open it back up for questions. Councillor Oliver.
Can I respond to something rather than asking a question? Just in terms of it being a snapshot, but the below target recycling rates are certainly part of our ongoing work. And at Cabinet, we're going to be considering the outcomes and the request from the Scrutiny Committee on fly tipping, etc. So yeah, very much a live issue and not just something that we could accept.
Thank you. Councillor Graham.
Thank you. I want to ask again when we're going to start measuring the amount of black bin waste as a tonnage rather than a percentage, because when our recycling rate goes down, there's so many possible explanations of why that's happening. But unless we do the research, we won't know what it's telling us. But if we can reduce our total amount of rubbish, then I think that would be much more useful information. And it's a huge amount of work, collecting a huge amount of information, and I would like to make it more usable.
I was just going to say that that's something that we'll take down. So these indicators, so I would just like to say I didn't do all of this work. This is Greater Norwich piece of work. So it has work from Broadland and South Norfolk councils in there as well, which is why the indicators are monitored in a way that they've been monitored for X period of time and for direct comparison. But we definitely take that point away, and when we're looking at the GNLP indicators coming forward for the new local plan, we definitely understand that there are indicators that can be measured in a different way to make them more usable.
Thank you. Opening it up again, unless anyone else wants to come in new. Okay, I'll go Councillor Oliver, Councillor Graham, and Councillor Carney.
Yeah, just in response to the last point, I just wanted to say that city environmental officers have got the unenviable task of looking regularly at what people actually do put in their bins for contamination rates. So that is something that even if we're not producing a measure of the tonnage, we've got an idea of where things are going right and where they aren't so much.
Councillor Graham.
My other question is about targets as well. So I'm looking at page 22, and we have targets to decrease our carbon emissions, but there's no number on that, and I'm hoping that there might be in subsequent reports, because we know we have to reduce them by about 13% year on year, although I think it might have gone up since then because we didn't, so we'll have to do it faster.
So I think the current indicator is just a reduction in carbon emissions. Do we know what the GNLP one is at the moment, or if we don't know what it is at the moment, we can certainly have a look and find out if there is a number on there and then come back to you on that. That's okay.
Thank you. Any further questions? Oh, Councillor Carlo, sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jen. Yes, I want to raise rivers on page 50, table 3.2. Percentage of rivers assessed as good or better. And this table appears in the annual monitoring report year after year, and the picture is always really, really bad. For example, ecological status of rivers, increased proportion of Broadland rivers classified as good or better, just 4%. And these terrible figures appear time after time, and I wonder what the councils do about it. Do they just look at these figures and just ignore them? Because no change seems to happen at all. And in relation to nutrient neutrality, I looked, as part of the GNLP, looked at the Greater Norwich Water Cycle Study 2020, and that showed that several water recycling centres didn't have sufficient capacity to treat wastewater from warm growth, including Whitlingham, and that upgrades would be required. And so I wondered what the GNL the partnership does when it has reports like that, which give not a very encouraging picture, and it seems to be no action is taken, and now we've seen obviously the nutrient neutrality issue come back and bite us. But so with this particular indicator, percentage of rivers classic assessed as good or bad, what is going to happen, please? Is it just purely for information, or do the councils, are they going to act in any way, please?
I'm not 100% sure, actually. I mean, it looks like we haven't had any data for the last couple of years either. This is the one we're talking about.
That's often the way as well.
Yes, which is, and I think, I'm not sure why that is. I'm not sure if that's because that's not collected anymore.
It might be because the data probably comes from a third party, such as the Environment Agency or someone like that, and they may not collect it in that way.
Yes, that's right.
And moving forward, we need to, well, we can feed back to the GNLP team who are working on the monitoring indicators for the Greater Norwich local plan at the moment about that issue and whether there's a better source of information for it. But in terms of addressing it, I think we're involved in various partnerships, aren't we? Is it the Broadland Futures Initiative, Water Resources East, and also we've got the River Wensum Strategy Partnership in Norwich.
Broadland Futures Initiative.
Sorry, and that's certainly something of concern, in the River Wensum.
Sorry, that was Broadland
Futures Initiative.
Futures Initiative.
And Water Resources East.
I think this is an issue that's moving up.
And water.
In terms of its profile at the moment, and it is really important that we capture the right information moving forward. So I'll certainly feed that back to my colleagues in the Norwich local plan team.
That would be really good, rather than just having it as information that sits there, actually, that we do something.
Can I just comment on that if we had been paying a bit more attention in 2017-18, we might not have been in the position we are now. Because I don't know that we personally could do anything about it, but we could have called upon those that can do something about it. I mean, we could have planted some more trees and do the mitigation that we've got to do now, but we would have been at least prepared for it. But when the letter came back in March, we all said, oh, that's terrible. But why didn't we say it's terrible back in 2017 and 18?
That's right, all the information was staring us in the face in these different reports, and yet, we haven't acted upon it. And so it shouldn't have been a surprise that the nutrient neutrality issue came up.
And also I think that this is talking about Broadland rivers very generally. It doesn't sort of break down, gives an understanding of how individual maybe river water bodies are affected. So again, maybe we can just explore that.
But most of the pollution does take place further up the river in Broadland, doesn't it, and other constituencies. It's not actually polluted in Norwich, so we have to pay attention to what else is happening, even though we're being treated the same as other other areas, other local authorities. But the chemicals that go in there from, the farming chemicals, well, that doesn't happen in Norwich, so.
No. I mean, I just, as a general point, to say that we'll soon be, hopefully, in about a year's time, adopting the Greater Norwich Local Plan. These monitoring indicators were drafted at the time that the plan was adopted back in 2014, but prior to that, really. So some of the information on which those monitoring indicators are based, we don't necessarily collect anymore. Things have moved on, so we recognise that some of these indicators aren't maybe all that as helpful as they might be, and we are moving towards a new system.
I think it's a good indicator because it gives us an indication of how we're treating the environment. And of course, some of the indicators from the new GNLP, I don't think all of them are terribly useful, certainly not on transport. And so I'd be sorry if this particular indicator was dropped.
We just have to find a way of getting the information that we need to monitor it.
Thank you. And before I bring Councillor Graham in, Jackie has reminded me that we have a all-member briefing on nutrient neutrality coming up. So that will be a forum. I know we've discussed it in meetings already to talk about 21st, to talk about how this came to be and some of the background. But yeah, Councillor Graham, thanks for waiting.
Still on this one, and in the interest of moving it on and up the agenda, can you make a recommendation that this indicator or whatever replaces it is looked at with major developments, and in particular the Wensum link and the Norwich East?
Are you talking about the rivers indicator or any particular indicator or all of the indicators?
I was talking specifically about the state of our rivers because it's just so appalling that 4% are assessed as good. I think we really need to consider the impact of development on our rivers, not just neutrality, but all those things.
Okay, so that's a recommendation there. Does anyone have any comments on that specifically before we move on?
That's a good idea.
Okay. Right, do we take that now or at the end?
You can do, and I'll add it to that.
Okay, so all those in favour?
Could I just say who's seconding that, please?
Oh, yeah.
Councillor Ludwig?
Could you just repeat the
Yes,
recommendation?
please, yeah. Councillor Graham?
The recommendation is that the percentage of rivers assessed as good or better is a major consideration with major developments such as the Wensum link and Norwich East.
Okay, so
sorry, are we talking about the indicators? Sorry, who is this recommendation to? Sorry, I don't understand.
Well, I guess all our recommendations are to cabinet, aren't they?
I think it's just the need to continue to monitor. And even if it wasn't in here, surely we as a council need to monitor by asking Anglian Water what sampling they're doing, and asking Heritage England and asking the Environment Agency, because we don't want to be in the same place as we are now with this new nutrient neutrality placed upon us in the future. And we actually perhaps it's come to our attention that we should have been asking those questions and not just presume that they were monitoring it on our behalf. So they weren't.
Sorry, can I just paraphrase then? So the motion is to continue to monitor the performance of rivers, whether assessment of rivers, whether they're good or bad. I'm sorry, I can't the state of the rivers. But I didn't understand how the major developments fitted into it. So yeah, as in table 3.
Well, it would be part of the environmental impact assessments, I think, wouldn't it? Maybe it is anyway, but I'm not sure.
Okay, so Councillor Graham, are you happy with that paraphrase as it stands?
Do you mind saying it again?
No.
To continue to assess.
To continue to assess the percentage of rivers assessed as good or better. To continue that as that indicator.
to continue.
I'm sorry, I need, I'm not a
Yeah.
planner, so perhaps if we could hand it over to Judith or,
Well,
yeah.
I'm not quite sure. First of all,
Mm.
this isn't going to cabinet. We don't report this to cabinet. So if it's a recommendation, it wouldn't be going to cabinet. But I was wondering if it's more of a suggestion that you want to be proposing as a panel that we need to monitor this particular indicator. But I'm not quite sure what the wording needs to change to.
I'll probably particularly what information we can get
Yes.
now.
We basically want to strengthen this indicator. I think that's what you want, and to monitor water quality. So we need to find out a little bit more about what can actually be monitored. I think.
But it's that indicator overall, but it's also getting that indicator taken into consideration with major planning applications that will have an impact.
That will
Yeah, because these basically are indicators relating to existing policy. So that's going to change. So we'll need to give that a bit of thought actually, because we can only monitor the policy.
Yeah.
You say to me, but I think you're saying you want a better indicator of river quality and to link that somehow to major developments. We'll have to have a little think about that and see what's possible with our colleagues.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Yeah, thank you.
So at the moment, presumably this has been raised and suggested is minuted, and then we can come back to it when that work's been done. Is that Councillor Giles?
I was just going to ask Jackie's advice on whether constitutionally do all recommendations from this panel go to the cabinet, or do some go to the GNDP depending on the item?
As you know, there are 3 members of the cabinet on the, so sometimes it's an informal situation, and obviously our colleagues are working with colleagues on the GNLDP. Yeah, so that's the way that sometimes things get put through.
Okay. Any last questions on this report? Councillor Carlo.
I wanted to raise, please, page 23, sustainable and renewable energy capacity, which is another indicator. And again, it's not a very good picture, especially given that we've had large housing allocations in the Norwich area, some of which have been built. And how is the council intending to encourage more renewable energy included in housing developments, in new ones? And just generally, I feel that some of the environment indicators are not really very encouraging. For example, on transport emissions. In South Norfolk, they were very, very high in 2016-17, and they've only fallen slightly. And the Broadland transport emissions have increased, which is probably a reflection of the MDR and POSIT hub. And the modal split, I realise that it's 2011 census as opposed to the 2021, and the information isn't out as yet. And it would be useful to have the 21 census information, because the 2011 census information isn't very encouraging. It shows an increase in car use for travel to work. So it would be, I don't know, if somewhere we could have that new data, please. Thank you.
Don't think that new data has been properly disseminated by ONS yet, because I have looked at for various other things about the census data. So if it is available for the next AMR, it will go in that we will use the most up-to-date information that we have available, basically. So unfortunately for this one, it's the 2011, which isn't very up to date, but it is what we have, I'm afraid. But we will,
I realise that.
We will put in the new census stuff
Yes.
when ONS have kind of
Hopefully
disseminated
it's looking more optimistic, but the renewable energy measures on new homes, please. Yeah, how is more going to be encouraged? Because it's really poor rates at the moment?
So, I mean, our current local plan policy is supportive of that. I don't believe there is a requirement. There is a requirement depending on the size of the development. Judith's just going to look up the GNLP.
Yeah, I'm just having a look at the
I think
GNLP.
it's 10 over 10 homes. There must have been blocks of more than 10 homes built in Norwich over the last year.
Sorry, in terms of this policy that's will be adopted in a couple of years' time, the Greater Norwich Local Plan supports delivery of local renewable and low carbon energy networks. There's a number of different policies that have that relate to climate change issues within the document. There's a climate change statement in there which sort of sets out the various policies that are appropriate. So policies 2 and 4 of the Greater Norwich Local Plan, I think, are particularly appropriate. But that's something. If we can feed that back to the team. This is probably quite an opportune moment to be just sort of raising issues about maybe some of the indicators.
Very good. Yes, we have to do obviously much better.
Okay, thank you. Any last questions on this? No. In which case, firstly, again, another potentially useful resource to members in the context of these discussions. Again, Jackie's reminded me, affordable housing presentation to planning, which will circulate in due course and follows on from some of what was talked about here. But otherwise, are we happy to accept the recommendation to note this? Mm-hmm. Yeah, is that a consensus? Right, brilliant. In which case, you there? Right. So thank you very much for all your work on this and for addressing quite a range of questions and topics there. So that's really appreciated by the panel. But moving on to the last item of this agenda, which is the Article 4 direction.
Thank you. That's me. Actually, the report has been written by Joy Brown, but she works reduced sort of hours, so she's not able to attend, so I'm going to present it today. So we last reported to you about an Article 4 direction, I think it was in June of this year, just to inform you about the government saying that the Article 4 direction that we had previously made wasn't targeted enough. So we previously made an Article 4 direction in July 2021, just as a bit of background, to remove permitted development rights for the conversion of offices to residential within the city centre. And that was a response to the monitoring. This is an example, I suppose, of where monitoring flags up an issue that we are wanting to address. So this, as Charlotte said earlier, there's been a loss of about 30% of office space in the city centre since 2008. So the direction was confirmed in December of last year. However, we were required to give 12 months notice to avoid compensation claims, so it wasn't due to come into force until July of this year. And in May, we received correspondence from the Department of Levelling Up, Housing and Communities, I'll just call that DLUC from now on, if that's okay, to say that the Article 4 direction wasn't targeted enough. And at that point, that's when we took the report to you last time round. The NPPF says that it needs to apply to the smallest geographical area possible rather than the whole of the city centre. So that direction was not brought into force for that reason. DLUC suggests that we collect further evidence to make the direction more targeted, and then to ask them to modify the existing direction with a new boundary. So in order to do that and to come up with a new evidence base, we commissioned Ramadus Consulting, who had previously done the study a year or so ago, a couple of years ago, to produce an updated study which identifies specific office buildings to be protected by the virtue of Article 4 direction. And the committee report does include the sort of methodology that's been used in that study, and it's set out in page 142, 143 of the report. And in summary, the Ramadas report applied what we call a RIG status to each office building, which separates the offices into different categories. So the R of the RIG is red, office premises that should be protected as their loss would be wholly unacceptable. Amber, very important premises, but where there are uncertainties that may be discussed with the council. And green, where a case could be made for the release of office buildings. So despite the fact that some officers are still considered as important, but because their loss couldn't be justified as wholly unacceptable. So the amber ones that I mentioned were discussed with the consultant, and they were subsequently categorised either red or green. So that's all set out in the body of the report. And then we plotted the resulting red office premises on the map to see what that would look like. And Rambus has produced a report of their findings, which is available at Appendix 6. So one of the key things to note is that Norwich's office economy seems to take a different form from a number of other cities. It doesn't have a central business district, but the offices are just scattered across the city. There are some clusters, but essentially they are quite dispersed, scattered across the city centre, which helps make the office economy in the city centre quite vulnerable. So the exercise does serve to highlight how important a number of individual offices are as well. And the proposed direction is given in Appendix 3 of the report. So there are quite a lot of appendices that go with this report, and if I just quickly explain the appendices to you. Appendix 1, which is on page 149 of the papers, just show all offices within the city centre, and that is the boundary that's shown there is the previous Article 4 direction boundary. Then on Appendix 2 shows as context, shows the list of buildings which have offices in them, because they're not affected by the permitted development rights. So we don't need this Article 4 direction to necessarily include them, although they were covered by virtue of the previous approach, which was area-wide. So Appendix 3 is the proposed modified Article 4 direction geographic area, and as you can see, it's not a line on a map, it's essentially a number of office buildings that we have gone through the process of considering whether their loss would be acceptable or not, and we considered these office buildings, their loss would be unacceptable through the work that Ramadas have carried out. So we feel that a justified case has been made for each office that's been identified for protection. And the offices are actually, I think they're listed in Appendix 4, just for the avoidance of doubt. They're all the ones that are going to be provided with the protection for the Article 4 direction, assuming it goes through. So on this basis, we felt that this was robust information, because essentially DLUC has raised the bar in terms of justifying Article 4 direction. So we had to respond to that, or otherwise we wouldn't necessarily have an Article 4 direction to take forward. So on this basis, we informally submitted our revised proposal, which is in Appendix 3, and the supporting information to DLUC for an officer comment. And their informal feedback was that they're comfortable with this revised boundary, which is very positive. So the next step is to put forward a formal request to the Secretary of State to modify the direction, and the recommendation to this panel is that we recommend to Cabinet that this request is made, and subject to the Secretary of State agreeing that our case is now supported by overwhelming evidence and meets the test for applying to the smallest geographical area possible, the direction should then be able to be brought into force on the revised boundaries. And there isn't a requirement to go out to consultation on that. We can bring that into force. So that's essentially the report. So essentially, if successfully brought into force, then any change of use from office to residential within the Article 4 area will require full planning permission to and assessment of planning applications will need to take into account the existing and emerging local plan, which enables the local authority to consider all material planning matters. So I think that's all I need to say. I'm happy to take any questions, but essentially, we knew that there was going to be a risk in and we flagged it up in earlier reports actually to SD panel and cabinet that there may be a risk of intervention by the Secretary of State, and there obviously was, and I know that they've also intervened in other places as well. So we have responded to this and come up with this much more targeted Article 4 direction. And it seems that we'll be able to go ahead with that should Cabinet approve that. So I'm happy to answer any further questions.
Brilliant, thank you, Judith, and our thanks, I'm sure, to Joy as well for her work on this. Yeah, I think it's a topic this panel's quite well versed on by now, but if there are any questions or comments on this latest update?
Satisfactory outcome.
Councillor Schmierer, then Councillor Stutley. Oh, or either way.
Yeah, I've got a few questions, perhaps because this is the first time for many years I've been on this panel. But could I just start by asking why the original boundaries that can be seen in Appendix 1, because there are offices outside of that boundary. For example, just on the other side of Barn Road, you've got Capitol House. Just to the north, you've got St Augustine's, you've got offices up there. So I was wondering why these boundaries.
Well, the study did, I think it did look a bit, this is going back a couple of years actually, it looked a bit beyond that, but it was looking for the most sort of cohesive area and didn't want to, we knew there was an issue about having a bigger area than that's actually required. So we wanted to make it as focused as possible, and this is essentially really largely the city centre boundary. In any case, there's a few little extensions on it, so we felt that the focus is Norwich city centre. I understand there are always going to be some offices outside any line, but that was based on work that was done by Ramidus a couple of years ago, and obviously we would have liked to progress with this boundary, but we haven't been able to for the reasons. And so, as I said earlier, the government has raised the bar in any case, so we didn't look at any buildings outside of that area, to be honest, in this most recent piece of work, because that was our starting point, what was agreed last time.
Right. Okay. And can I just have a follow up on that? I mean, is this going to be set in stone? So can this Article 4 direction be added to subsequently, or is this going to be it?
I think we would have to go through another process to amend it, to modify it. And if we were going to go outside the boundary, then it would be subject to consultation, because this previous boundary was subject to consultation. The reason we're not having to do consultation now is because we've already done that consultation. If you add something that's outside the boundary, we would need to go out to consult on it as well. So there's a whole new process that will be opened up.
Thank you.
Councillor Stutley.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've also been away from this panel for a while, so I've not seen anything recently on this, but I remember when it originally came to the committee, I believe pushed forward by Councillor Davis. And I'd just like to say thank you for the work that's gone into this, and the fact that we've nailed it down now to specific buildings. Incredibly robust. Thank you.
Any last questions? Councillor Giles? And then Carly.
I was just going to give my thanks as well for all of your hard work on this. I know this has been a really difficult thing to achieve, but it's a testament to all your hard work. We've hopefully got there, and I'm not sure how many secretaries of state have changed in the last few weeks. So, we'll see if they have a different opinion, but hopefully not. But no, thanks ever so much.
I'll pass that on to Joy. Thanks.
Councillor Carly.
Yes, thank you. I wondered whether the council has got a record of complaints from residents living in houses which have been achieved through permitted development, a record of complaints about poor standards, and also a detailed overview of the standards of houses which have been located in converted offices, because it would help to make a case to government at any suitable time to not carry on with allowing permitted housing development in offices.
I do seem to remember that maybe it was some of the work that we did prior to the first Article 4 drafting that we were aware of complaints, and also just from officer discussion about some of the issues with some of the converted properties. So it's not something we maintain a register of, but it's quite a good idea if we were able to access that easily. I'm not sure if we could, but it's something we can
if you were
think
called
about.
on to collect.
Yeah, just sort of, or just liaise with colleagues just to sort of keep an idea of the issues that are coming up in those sorts of properties.
Yes, that's right.
Councillor Smith?
Yeah, thank you. And on that point, Denise, I actually just had a casework yesterday from a resident in Vantage House complaining about issues there. So, and Vantage House is just one. I mean, there's obviously in the city centre, we've had Sentinel House and Crispin's House as well. These are three big developments that have all been converted over to into residential. But the other thing I'd say is that you'll probably not get as many complaints, I suppose, partly because it's often buy-to-let landlords who buy them up and then rent them out, so that the length of tenancy there is quite short, and obviously, so we have to take that into account. My question to Judith, if I could, is about obviously I want to also echo my thanks about this, because as I say, these the three developments I've just already mentioned, Luke, are responsible for, I'm sure, a large percentage of that 30% decrease. And I know that there are, for example, a waiting list for people at St George's Works wanting office accommodation for the city centre. How does this sort of the sort of office plan fit in with the sort of? It seems like Norwich seems to be moving towards a city of quarters, albeit at least on a map anyway. And because you make a very good point that we don't have a central sort of office hub, they are scattered around the city centre. So how does it kind of tie in with the sort of bigger vision of sort of 15-minute cities going forward, the whole sort of city of quarters and things like that, please?
I'm not sure about the issue of quarters exactly. I know what you're saying, but the policy in the Greater Norwich local plan is to have a mix of uses in the city centre that sort of support each other, like housing, education, culture, and office as well. And it's about just encouraging that throughout the city centre. So and the fact that it does that is quite good, I think, because we don't have specific office, very focused office areas. So I don't know if that answers your question really, but it's certainly something we're trying to encourage a range of supporting uses in the city centre as a whole.
And I've got two more questions, if I may. One, just a specific question on page 144, which is at the bottom. Exception of any existing office buildings situated within site allocation GMLP 0506. That's page 144.
Yes, I see that. That is the Anglia Square allocation, I think.
Which is outside of this, the map.
Yeah, it is.
So, okay.
Yeah.
So if it is that, which I suspected it might have been, it doesn't probably need to be that exception, because your area doesn't include Anglia Square, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that is correct.
Yeah.
So
just that, flag that up. And I've now completely forgotten what my second question was. Come back to me in a second. Sorry.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions while Councillor Schmier is remembering his? Okay, go on.
Go on, sorry.
I just wanted to ask, please, whether a new tenant has come forward for Marsh on Queen's Road, because they've been vacated. So
I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that.
Councillor Schmier.
Yeah, obviously this isn't going to be a moratorium on commercial or office properties going over. How confident are you, because there is an issue, I say, with this, that the policies that we've got within development management policies, I think it's DM17 and DM19, are rigid enough to be able to prevent this whole-scale transfer is still happening, albeit with planning consent.
Yeah, the report does reference that in paragraph 16 actually, and talks about those two policies. And also, we're going to be reviewing that, as I said in the previous item, we were intending to start as soon as the GNLP has been adopted. But the Greater Norwich Local Plan itself has got a policy, which is one that you just noted in paragraph 16 as well. So I think we're moving towards the GNLP policy quite soon, but we do have those existing DN policies, and they are still operating. I think that there's an issue about DN 19 seeks to protect high quality office space over 1,500 square metres, but I don't think it can at the moment then protect it under that figure, because that's the way the policy is written. But when we move to the Greater Norwich Local Plan, the policy wording, I think, will enable that because of the way it's worded. So, yes, it is an issue that we're sort of transitioning to a different policy framework, but we will be preparing and developing DN policies as soon as we can, that sort of to complement the policy, the strategic policy of the Greater Norwich Local Plan.
Thank you.
Are there any final questions before we bring this item to a close? Okay, in which case shall we take the recommendation, which again is to recommend to Cabinet on 14th December 2022 that the Council formally ask the Secretary of State for Levelling Up, Housing and Communities to modify the proposed non-immediate Article 4 direction to remove permitted development rights for the conversion of offices to residential within Norwich City Centre. Is it? Yeah. 16th. There is then. Cabinet was 16th, but otherwise, do we all support that recommendation? Brilliant. In which case, thank you both for your time at our meeting today and for answering all our questions. But otherwise, I'll bring the